All right, today we're starting chapter 5 and the trig identities. So as a warm-up, try and simplify this expression. Okay, so to do this, think of what does tangent equal. So tangent is normally your y over x. Sine is also equal to y, so you can simplify this as sine of t over cosine of t, and then we still have the other cosine of t here. Those cancel out, and this simplifies to sine of t. So this is the basic idea of what we're going to be doing for a lot of this section, this chapter, is simplifying trig functions from something more complicated to something simpler. So we're going to get really good at simplifying different expressions. Just a note, this will come up later, but there is a sheet with all of these trig identities on it. It should look like this. It is in this folder on Schoology, the trig analytical trig unit. It should be the top. So find this, download it, print it out, have it next to you, and be using it a lot. The other option then is this exact values for the unit circle. So this is also in the same exact spot. I'm going to be using this a little later on in the unit. Okay, so reciprocal identities. These are not new. You've seen these before. These ones you should know by heart. Like, they should just be easy. You know them. You don't have to look them up. They make sense. Like, you see cosecant, you know it's 1 over sine. So you can switch those back and forth pretty easily. Quotient identities, same thing. Like, you should just know that sine or tangent is sine over cosine, cotangent is cosine over sine. If you don't, it will be fine, but it'll take you longer to do work because you won't be able to just know them off the top of your head. These ones you should be familiar with, so when you see something like this, you can know, oh yeah, that's what this is. And you can still look it up, but you know where to look. A note with these, you can rearrange any of them. So this one, I could subtract the cosine squared over and get sine squared of x equals 1 minus cosine squared x, and that's still valid. You can move stuff around as well. Even odd, this is the same idea. You want to be able to recognize these and decide when you want to use them, but you don't have to memorize them. Cofunction, same idea here. You want to be able to recognize them, be like, oh, that looks familiar, I think I've seen that before, and go look it up on your trig identity sheet, but you don't need to memorize these identities. All right, so that formula sheet, that's what I showed you with all the different stuff on it. Right now we're just using the top chunk of things. So some tips, and then we'll do some examples. So the first tip is know your identities. So the ones you're supposed to have memorized, memorize them so that you can go through your homework faster. Otherwise, it's just going to take you way longer to have to look up every single thing every single time. So the first example here is we want to simplify this expression. So this first one, if you look at the cofunction identities, this one will become sine of x. You can look at your even odd ones. Cosine of negative x is the same as cosine of x. And then this simplifies down to tangent of x. And that is the answer for this one. This one here, I see a sine squared and a cosine squared, which if you go back to your Pythagorean identities is one option. So if I clump these two, those two added together have to equal 1. So I can rewrite this as 1 plus tangent squared of x all over secant of x. And then stay in that same Pythagorean identity section, and 1 plus tangent squared is going to be the same as secant squared of x. And this will simplify down to secant of x. One of those will cancel. So the next tip here is if you get stuck on something, if you don't find an identity that's makes sense off the top of your head, put everything in terms of sine and cosine. Usually something will cancel at this point and you can get a little bit farther along. So the example here, we're going to use that tip, put these in terms of sines and cosines. So cotangent is cosine of x over sine of x. Secant is 1 over cosine. and cosecant is 1 over sine of x. So at this point, these cosines will cancel. Now we have 1 over sine of x, 1 over sine of x. Our sine of x will cancel, and you are left with 1 for this one. So that's the next step. The last tip here is when necessary, find a common denominator. So if you have like two different things, two fractions added together, combine them first, find the common denominator, add them together, and then go through and simplify. So the example here, I'm going to start by rewriting these as sines and cosines. You have cosine of t plus sine of t over cosine of t times sine of t. So you end up getting cosine of t plus sine squared of t all over cosine of t. So now you want to do something to simplify it. We have two separate fractions. So we're going to find a common denominator, which is going to be cosine. So we're going to multiply this by cosine of t over cosine of t. You'll get cosine squared for this times this plus the sine squared all over cosine of t. Now, this up here is going to be a Pythagorean identity. So you get 1 over cosine of t, and 1 over cosine is the same as secant, so your answer is secant of t. So there's everything all together. Last example here is going to be the same idea. We want to find a common denominator first. So I'm going to multiply over here by 1 plus sine of t, 1 plus sine of t. This one's be 1 minus sine of t over 1 minus sine of t. So if you multiply that out, 1 times this, we're going to get 1 plus sine of t on top, and then plus 1 minus sine of t. On the bottom, 1 plus sine of t times 1 minus sine of t. We're all in one fraction now. So then here, this sign is going to cancel with this sign, and then we have 1 plus 1 left over. So you end up getting 2. And then I'm going to FOIL the bottom out. So 1 times 1, you get 1. 1 times negative sine is negative sine of t. 1 times sine is plus sine of t. And then sine times sine, you get negative sine squared. Again, these are going to cancel. And we're left with 2 over 1 minus sine squared of t. You look at your Pythagorean identities. This is now going to be cosine. So we get cosine squared. This comes from right here, rearranging your Pythagorean identity. So you have cosine squared plus sine squared equaling 1. If you subtract the sine squared over, you get 1 minus sine squared equals cosine squared. And then this would be 2 secant squared. And that's your final answer. So that's it for notes. Here are all the tips all in one slide if you want to use those. But know your trig identities, put things in sines and cosines if you don't know what to do, and then find a common denominator if you have different fractions. The homework, again, check on Schoology to make sure that everything is there. And then, since it's disappeared, I'll just keep talking. And remember, on Schoology, all of the homework have keys. So if you get stuck and don't know where to go, just check the homework key and see if you can figure it out from there.